Hello, and welcome to another installment of the Traxo Office Hours series. Today, co-hosted by Global Secure Accreditation on using ISO 31030 to tackle travel risk management. Today, we'll be taking a look about what ISO 31030 is and reviewing the benefits through the legal lens, as well as hearing about the practical applications and implementation from two of your peers that have measured their organization's preparedness on travel risk mitigation compared to the ISO 31030 guidelines. A bit of housekeeping before we jump in. We are recording today's webinar for your review and to share with colleagues as you see fit. We'll be making the recording available via the Traxo Resource Center, as well as on our YouTube channel. Also, the Q&A feature is open now, and we will be monitoring throughout the webinar. So as questions arise, please feel free to submit them through the webinar. We'll also be asking a poll question and are grateful for your responses. So without further ado, let's introduce today's guests. Bob Quick enjoyed a 32-year career as a police officer, and in 2008, he was appointed Assistant Commissioner at New Scotland Yard, where he was responsible for the counter-terrorism nationally, the protection of the British royal family, the UK Prime Minister and Cabinet, the foreign diplomatic community, and visiting heads of state. Between 2004 and 2008, he was Chief Constable of Surrey Police. In 2018, Bob established Global Secure Accreditation Ltd, or GSA, introducing the world's first independently validated security and safety accreditation for hotels and other accommodations. He was co-opted into the BSI Policy Working Group on BS ISO 31030 2021 from 2019 to 2021. Benjamin Fisher regularly represents corporate executives and corporations in criminal actions, regulatory investigations, and high-stakes business litigation. He has significant experience litigating almost every aspect of criminal and civil cases in both federal and state court. In June of 2014, Ben was named a Rising Star by the New York Law Journal, in which he was selected as one of 40 lawyers under the age of 40 that represent the next generation of dynamic, intelligent, and civic-minded New York bar leaders. Since that time, he was also named a leading lawyer by Chambers USA, America's leading lawyers for business in the area of litigation, white-collar crime, and government investigations, where he has been described as a very smart, hardworking, and nuanced attorney. Letitia Parati is the head of Travel Risk and Security Operations Center at PricewaterhouseCoopers, where she leads a 24/7 security team monitoring and responding to worldwide events that could impact PwC, as well as the firm's travel security program. Prior to that, she worked in corporate security in the private sector, international development, and the United Nations. Last but not least, Mukesh Sharma is responsible for conducting all business travel and security operations at elevated risk locations in the safest manner in accordance with organizational travel and security procedures. He is leveraging his expertise and experience from working across South Asia and Denmark. Mukesh advises on best practices in terms of policies, procedures, and plans. Mukesh started with FL Smith in August of 2017. Prior to joining FL Smith, he worked as a global threat coordinator with CDK Global and Reliance Industries Limited. He was responsible for the development and delivery of a range of crisis management exercises and security trainings for his organization. Mukesh is a certified protection professional from ASIS International, certified business continuity professional from DRI International, and certified data privacy solutions engineer from ISACA. On behalf of Traxo and GSA, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. Bob, do you mind starting us off today?
I'll be delighted, Justin. Thank you. So before I start, we're going to try and run a poll just to gauge familiarity of delegates or visitors to the webinar. So perhaps while I'm speaking, you can give your input into this very brief poll. So my job is really just to refresh your memory about what ISO 31030 is and why it may be important to you. So as you've heard, I was co-opted onto the UK working group that helped develop the standard. It was published in September 2021, and so it's been in existence for just over a year, and it is indeed the world's first benchmark for travel risk management standards. So it's the first time we've had something that we can all look to to gauge how we're doing and make a judgment about how effective and how thorough our travel risk management procedures are. So it's a very authoritative standard because it comes from ISO, which is the world's foremost standards organization. And for those of you not familiar with it, ISO's been around since 1947. It's affiliated with various UN committees. It develops international standards across whole sectors of the economy. And these have been adopted and mainstream standards that businesses operate by all over the world. And many of you will be familiar with ISO 27001 information security management and ISO 9001 business standards and so forth. It's a non-government organization. It comprises 166 national standards bodies. So the American National Standards Institute, the British Standards Institute, all represent their nations in the constituency that is ISO. And indeed, as this standard was developed, 31030, all 166 countries or national standards bodies were consulted, and indeed, probably over 80 countries were very active in contributing to its development. Why did it come about? Well, it came about really in response to increased anxiety on the part of travellers and travel managers and travel risk specialists about the risks that they're having to navigate and deal with. The increased complexity and intensity of threats around the world in relation to travel, increased media reporting of travel-related incidents, increased litigation in organisational travel, business travel, and of course this corporate duty of care that is becoming ever more important to organisations and the people that they employ. And survey after survey have really endorsed these concerns. And so it's important to know that there are two types of standards, and I'll come back to this in a minute. But there are the type A standards, which are certifiable standards, like 27001 and others you may be familiar with. And there are type B standards, which are guidance standards. And these are really in their early stages of development. They're being, if you like, road tested by the industry, and they may well graduate to type A certifiable standards in the future. So before we sort of reach out to Ben on some aspects of this standard that he's been looking at, I'll just remind you of what the standard asks us to do. It really asks us to establish a travel risk management policy, if we don't already have one, define the principles, the intentions, and the direction of that program to achieve your travel risk management objectives, integrate much of your activities that can contribute to safe travel, so your risk management specialists, your security teams, your HR, occupational health, travel management, your legal department, procurement, IT, don't forget information security. So it's really about orchestrating activity across your organisation to achieve your objectives. And it needs to be appropriate to the organisation's needs, the resources that you have available, and your risk criteria and your organisational risk appetite. So it's a flexible standard. It recognises organisations have different needs, they have different availability of resources, and their programmes vary enormously, as well as the activities that they engage on business travel. It really asks for organisations to make clear the roles and responsibilities of all of those that are contributing to your travel risk programme. And it's very much built around that duty of care that I mentioned earlier. So just very briefly to touch on the scope, this is an end-to-end standard. It really starts at the very beginning of travel when the prospect of business travel is being envisaged, and talks about traveller assessment. Is your traveller actually capable of undertaking the travel that you're requiring them to undertake? Your authorisation and booking process, is it visible? Are you actually cited on all of the organisational travel that's occurring? And have you got control of it and proper oversight of it? Destinations, accommodation choices, health and medical risks in the locations that you're travelling to, and the facilities that might be there. So it's really very, very comprehensive. And on that note, returning to the fact that it's published as a guidance standard, I wanted to raise the question and really turn to Ben for his input on the status of the standard, and whether, if it's guidance, can it be ignored or should it be taken seriously? So Ben, I know you've looked into this as well as other law firms in other jurisdictions such as the UK, France and elsewhere. What would you say to those that perhaps thought, as a guidance standard, it's not really something to worry too much about?
Well, thank you, Bob, for having me and teeing up the question. And it's good to see my fellow panelists, and I'm so glad everybody is participating in what I think are really interesting issues around travel and corporate risks. Bob, to answer to your question, I think I come at this from a slightly unique perspective as a U.S. white-collar criminal defense, financial crimes regulatory attorney, but with a caseload that involves numerous international aspects. Nothing is as simple as just being in the U.S. And many of my, much of my work does have, touched on what's happening globally. But I can tell you that as a general matter, when we are dealing here with U.S. authorities and they are looking backwards with 2020 hindsight into an issue that arose, and there is a standard that may articulate what a reasonably law-abiding corporation should be doing, they are going to sort of hitch their wagon to that standard, and they're going to be very focused on ensuring whether or not the corporation was applying best practices. And in some respects, it may not fully matter to the person who's reviewing this in hindsight, kind of how broadly this was adopted or not. But if there are a set of standards that are being focused on, or at least advocated for, and you are not, adhering to those as quickly as your peers, that could be a problem in the sense that the regulator could then view that as, you are not acting reasonably, your controls are deficient, and we think that's part of an overall culture of non-compliance. And that can frame, in my experience, how a regulator or any sort of a judge or any body that's looking into the factual circumstances around what happened through travel is viewing this. And so it's one of these things where, as a practical matter, I think we all understand how important standards are, implementing policies and having procedures are to showing third parties or people who are looking at various events that the company was at least trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, Ben, I mean, that makes entire sense. And I must say, our interaction with UK-based lawyers has been very similar, where their advice is that it's very likely that if something were to go wrong, and we all hope that it won't, but sadly, occasionally it does, claimants are very likely to point to this standard and ask very difficult questions about how seriously you took it.
The other thing I would say, Bob, is that the risks are heightened now in many ways that they weren't before. The risks were always there, but now we live in a world where lots of things have happened. obviously the elephant in the room is COVID. So that is going to be always a focus of, are we keeping our employees safe in that respect? But we also live in a world where people and employees I emphasize may, some may be less inclined to travel, but if they do have to travel for work, I think we'll be more attuned to, what the risks are, and are those risks accounted for in ways that maybe they weren't before, because travel was just really, you just traveled and there was not much of a choice. We're all lucky enough to be doing this by Zoom, which was a concept we didn't know what that was in 2019, but here we are. So in that regard, if you do have, a changing world with, world events, whether it's a global pandemic or, other international events that may have an impact on travel, and there are a heck of a lot of them, I think. Plus, employees having more options, I do think now we're in a position where the focus is really more on the employer to ensure, as a practical matter, that they're doing the right thing, and that they at least have standards and policies to account for their employees.
Absolutely.
So Ben, I have a thought on this. I just wanted to clarify. So in my own personal research, as I looked into ISO 31030, it's been pointed out. So ISO, even though it has the word ISO, the International Organization Standards, ISO 31030 is not technically a legal standard, correct?
Yes.
It's not an official legal standard, but it's more of a guideline. However, if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is that there is something to point to as a review to see if companies and organizations have taken this seriously, and it does leave the door open for some legal considerations, since there is something out there to be able to look to. Am I hearing you right on that?
Yeah, and Justin, just to put a really fine point on that, I think that oftentimes when I'm working with companies and dealing with regulators and trying to either convince regulators that our clients were doing the right thing, or convince regulators that our clients' controls and processes have substantially improved. One of the things we do point to are the ISO standards, and because they are viewed, as this sort of gold star that many companies are striving for and work hard to obtain, and so that is something that we do focus on, again, not necessarily as a legal requirement, but this is a achievement. This is something that the company is focused on and takes seriously, and that becomes very important in when we deal with the regulator, for the regulator to understand, okay, what kind of a company are we dealing with here? Are we dealing with a company who's going to be proactive and thoughtful about how they're dealing with this issue? Are we dealing with a company that maybe is more flat-footed and is reactive? And if it's the former, that can really pay dividends in my, as a lawyer for the company, discussions with regulators. Yeah. Is that helpful, Justin?
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. I know there are some that in the poll results show that at least 44% of the people that responded to our poll at the beginning of this were not familiar with what ISO 31030 is. So I think it is important to take a little bit of time to lay the groundwork and define it as what it is versus what it isn't. We don't, and I want to make it clear to our audience, we're not trying to position this as a you better do this or else, but more of a this is something else to put in your tool belt to make sure that your organization is prepared and adequately proactive about your risk management program. Also, and thank you, Ben, for that feedback. I definitely want to make sure that we make plenty of room for Letitia and Mukesh, because I have a feeling that most of our audience is here today to hear from them, because these are their peers and they'd like to hear about their thoughts on that. So Bob, I'll turn it back to you and to introduce Letitia and talk about her program.
Okay, thank you, Justin. So in the UK, a year on from the publication, we're now seeing organisations who are becoming familiar with this standard coming forward and seeking to test their own programs against that standard. And in fact, leading the way in this process was PwC and Letitia and her team, who approached GSA to give an independent audit of their program against the standards. And perhaps if I turn to Letitia now, Perhaps, Letitia, you can talk us through why you felt you should do that and how that went and what benefits accrued from it.
Sure. Thank you, Bob. And again, thank you for inviting me on this panel to talk a little bit about PwC's journey with ISO 3130. So, I mean, for those who don't know, PwC is an international firm. We have a very large footprint, over 150 countries, thousands of travelers on a monthly basis, and we operate in various security environments. And travel is very much a key component of our business and the services that we provide to our clients. So with people being our most important assets and really putting safety of our people at the top of our agenda and being committed to the safety of our people, regardless of their work location, we definitely thought it was very natural to benchmark our travel risk policies and procedures against the ISO. And Bob mentioned the ISO was published about a year ago. It was still during the pandemic. So that gave us a little bit of a time and space to take a step back and to look at our travel risk management program. The volume was done. It was the right time to do so. And we did like everyone. We got familiar with the ISO piece. We read it. And we started first with conducting an internal gap analysis to identify the strength, but also the areas of improvement for our program. And after that internal review, we felt like we were ready to be assessed by an external auditor. And we also wanted really to obtain a more like objective and independent review on the maturity of our program. So we had GSA coming in, and they conducted a readiness assessment and audit. The audit was very comprehensive, very rigorous, very professional. We had a very good experience with GSA, and their methodology really worked for PwC. They are alternative, suppliers for anyone else. What the auditors did is they spent the time looking at all of the various components of our programs. So everything from risk identification, risk assessment, communication to travelers, incident management, training, education programs. They also spent a lot of time interviewing key stakeholders. So that was obviously our security team, our 24/7 security operations, our travel team, but also our travelers to get, the view of the travelers, which was really important. And they provided us with a report, comments, and suggestions on our program. And I think after that, we really had an objective assurance that our program was mature. But we also learned a lot, during the process. And probably the thing that we learned the most was that ISO 3130 can really be adapted to all organizations. We are a big international organization, but each firm is kind of flexible on how they can implement best practices that are set within the ISO. Like there's not only one way to identify threats or to communicate these threats. And this can be done by just, looking at the ISO and finding the best way to do it. So I thought it was, extremely beneficial for us to go through that process. I think, obviously having that objective assessment that we had a mature security program, it was a good way to demonstrate to our C-suite and our own staff that we are doing the right thing for them. And I think this is really, really important because it really gives a lot of confidence for our own staff when they are traveling overseas. And it really helps when we're trying to, constantly promote the safety and the security culture within the organization. So I think, it really helped on that end. And perhaps another good benefit on, using an ISO like this, and I think this is not only applicable to PwC, is that it really enables business. A lot of organizations will not think about conducting some businesses in unfamiliar location or maybe what we call high-risk locations. But if you do have a strict and robust travel risk management process in place, then you are potentially able to have new opportunities in locations that you will not have considered beforehand. So I think overall it was an extremely good, process to go through. It gave us that reassurance as a travel risk manager, and most importantly, give the assurance to our travelers that we taking duty of care seriously, and we will be always looking after them.
Thank you for that, Letitia. We've already got a question in there specifically for you, but I'm going to table that because I want to give Mukesh an opportunity. I just want to let the audience know we are seeing the Q&A and we will get to your questions. It's interesting, Mukesh, when we talk to you and your considerations for looking into adopting the ISO 31030 guidelines for FL Smith, what I think about when I talk to you on the prep call is a lot of the conversations that I have with travel managers, travel buyers, travel risk managers about how they see things that could be completely valuable for their organization, but the frustration is getting the attention of their leaders, getting this on the plate or the docket for their C-suite to take a look. And you had some success with that, and you have a bit of a story that you can share, and you brought some slides with you as well. Love to hear about, because you're in a different kind of point in the journey on this consideration than Letitia is. I think you're kind of maybe midway. Letitia's more towards the end, with regards of the assessment and looking through. And you've recently been able to get the attention of your leaders, and I'm sure the audience would like to hear the way that you came about being able to get something like this in place. So please share that with us.
Thank you, Justin, for being, inviting me as a panelist. Talking about FL Smith, we are almost 140 years old company, having our existence in more than 60 countries and travel happening more than 100 countries. And the major challenge is the traveler are going into sites and remote locations, which are, it's such a volatile environment that we have to take care of their safety. And when it's come for duty of care, we found it ISO 31030 is the bread and butter for the travel risk managers like me. We have many issues in the past which has led to us to revisit our procedures and policies, but we not have a standard which are guiding the organization to speak the volume. So what I see here with the last year 31030 coming in, place, the organization now considered it is a valid document which will help the organization to make the robust travel security procedures. It helps, and it goes along with the digital tools what we have. We do have pre-briefing during the travel post notification and post-travel briefing sessions. But what it helps is it simplify the process, and we can directly target the gaps, what is there in the system. I would also like to mention that it is helping us because the way we are spanned, we have all these 6 regions covered, and each regional security team are speaking with the on-ground team and making arrangements for our business traveler to undertake the trips on most safest manner. We also have situation where the things are changing rapidly. When we talk about that, COVID is a big example, but the Ukraine crisis, whereby we have a situation to evacuate our people from the Black Sea and the borders area, and it happened in a very fast manner. But due to this plan in place, we have exact details of our traveler. We can know how to act on the situations, and we were in all the time in touch with the team, as well as the HR was consulting the employees member. So it helped the organization to take the best practices in our procedures. It also helps to understand that what are the various means where the organization can support an employee. I have few case studies through which we can see how these standards help us recently. We have one shooting incident happening in Mexico, and we have our business location there, and we have a business traveler. But with the tools in place, we have notified our traveler. The challenge is what we face. The traveler was not able to communicate. The moment we triggered our local team, we come to know that traveler was on his leisure time, and the moment after 4 hours he has come back and see the notification, he acknowledged all his safety, and it gives us a assurance that he was safe. Although the notification goes to him, the moment we get a compliance from the local team member that he is safe in hotel, and that hotel has been audited by one of the TRM, so it is giving a high level of assurance. The second was the major challenge. What we see sometimes the business do send their large volume of people to seminar and conferences, and we see there are multiple cases where huge number of travelers were in the same vessel or a flight, and that got targeted. But the board members are not trying to acknowledge that, and these standards give us an element. If we have a substantial number of people, it won't be allowed. So what we did is we just keep it into 2 to 3 people from the top level and a single digit from the medium to low level travelers in a single flight. And this has taken a bind because of the 2 incidents which we see. One happened in the mining industry, which is of Australia in 2010, when they lost top executives in the plane crash. And second incident happened when the top 2 layer of their executive management was on the same flight, got targeted. So this standard specifically in XGC speaks about the number of travelers should be there, and it will definitely address few of the risks which your organization is facing. And lastly, as I said, hotel accommodation, we do annually do a RFP with all the hotels with the safety and security standard. We see many hotels being targeted each year by the militant or by some other reason, but this standard has giving an extra element. And GSA in place are giving an extra edge with the performance of the safety and security of these hotels. And we put a business delegate in those hotels and ensure that they are getting the needed safety during their business stay. So for me, we find it a very good standard, and few of the internal audits what we have carried, we found these are the issues which we able to address with the new standard. So the top management has agreed, and we have annual checks on our policies and procedures, which has been listened by the top management. And I must show that to be responsible for the travel risk management program, we ensure that when we put our travelers not in high and extreme risk, we ensure that they are getting all the needed attention from the organization, and we are fulfilling our due diligence. Most of the time we are talking about duty of care, but we forget about due diligence, how effective the organizations are coming out on that side. So yeah, this standard is a guiding principle for the organization, and we found it very effective with the way we span in different parts of the world.
So Mukesh, just to clarify, the examples that you gave on those case studies, you used the ISO 31030 as, hey, we kind of need to take a look at this. Am I right? Am I hearing you right on that? Like, so basically the documentation was there within ISO 31030 as ammunition, if you will, for making a case for why your organization should adopt it,
exactly.
Adopt those guidelines.
And it helps us to go directly to the top boss, and we have any deviation to be approval by the top boss. So now it have an attention of our CEO. So any violations is been there, need a non-compliance been addressed. Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times I talk to someone in your position and they say, I wish I could get the attention of our CEO. So thank you for giving that example for the people listening today. I want to make sure that we make room for the Q&A. And so thank you all for your participation and input here. So I'm just going to kind of scroll through here. I think this question is probably going to be good for a combo of Bob and Ben. Alex Thompson says, I represent a firm that provides international legal assistance in more than 100 countries for urgent and unforeseen legal events. My question, we've noticed the lack of policies on duty of care, safety and prevention, and therefore the potential contingencies for companies in the digital nomad trend. It seems that companies don't even have policies to determine what a digital nomad is. Your comments? Who wants to take it first? Ben, Bob?
Sorry, I'm trying to get off of mute. So yeah, for sure, we encounter this on a regular basis, and and we accept, this is an evolutionary process. This is a new standard, and what we're seeing is pricking the conscience of organisations, to look at this issue in much more depth than they have in the past. And actually, the standard does talk about, the digital side of travel management, and actually how tracking tools, monitoring tools, communication tools play a really big role in monitoring and protecting and safeguarding their employees, particularly when they're in higher risk locations. But there are a lot of considerations when you're using that technology. There are privacy issues, and you do need to develop policies which really regulate the use of that technology in a transparent way, so your employees are clear. In some jurisdictions, you might need to get consents to use those digital tools. So there are a lot of things to be thought about, but it's common sense, most of it, and having that policy framework makes it really clear to everyone about how it works and the benefits that it brings.
Excellent, excellent. And so Bruce McIndoe chimed in and kept me honest on my description and the accuracy of the definition. ISO equals International Organization for Standardization. So I don't think I said that quite correct. So thanks for keeping me honest there, Bruce. Ben, you had something to add?
Yeah, no, I think Bob did a nice job covering it. I mean, I think it does. I think the question is a really good one. It presents certain complexities in the pre-pandemic world, and I think even more so in a post-pandemic world. I think understanding where your employees can be on any given day is a challenge in and of itself. If not without travel, you throw travel into that mix, and it could be even more challenging. And obviously, it creates additional hoops that the employees may need to jump through to inform their employer at all times where they're going to be and what they're going to do. But it almost has to happen because the risks are too great if those aren't accounted for. And I think Bob is absolutely right to raise the nuanced issues in different jurisdictions that need to be accounted for multinational corporations, like privacy and other issues. I think the good news is, at least in what I do, the regulators are very receptive to understanding that things may need to be very different on a jurisdictional basis. A policy that might work well in the US may not work well in Europe, and vice versa, and in different countries. And so there is not necessarily a one size fits all, but I do think that there is room to have some flexibility within the parameters of having an appropriate policy in place. Nobody wants to feel like they're being monitored or tracked, but at the same time, the companies do need to understand what's happening and provide support if necessary. So it's a fine line, and that's why we rely on the great expertise of those on this call to tell us exactly how to handle that, like our friends Letitia and Mukesh.
Great, thank you for that, Ben. So Rita Beth Craig asks, how did PwC meet the recommendation for pre-travel assessment of fitness to travel for thousands of travelers? And were there GDPR or HIPAA considerations when asking travelers to self-attest to meet that requirement?
All right, I'll probably start with this one, and I may defer to Ben regarding the GDPR and legal consideration then. But I think it's a really important question, because the volume of travelers is definitely a challenge. It was a huge challenge before the pandemic, and it's still nowadays. So when you have to deal with such a large volume of travel, there are really two ways to do it. The first one is relying as much as you can on technology. So we have developed a lot of technology internally, including automation, to really look at the volume of travel requests that we receive and sort of triage all of these requests. And from a security perspective, it works brilliantly, where we will really focus on, I would say, more like higher risk destination and more like unfamiliar destinations, first-time travelers, and so on. When it comes to the medical side of it, Most of my team, we're not medical experts. And that's where we actually are bringing a third party to support us with the fitness to travel. So we are using that third party who is looking at this request and then helping out travelers. So we do have an automated process where every time travelers will go on a location, they will receive medical advice and information with the ability to contact that third party to have a little bit more of a one-to-one chat regarding any sort of medical concerns that they may have. And I think that's probably one of the benefits of the ISO here that I could have mentioned earlier is sometimes you can't do everything yourself and you may need to bring in suppliers, and ISO will sort of help out identifying which component may be best outsourced to a third party for that support. And that's what we've done at PwC. Now, when it comes to the GDPR consideration, I do not look at obviously medical record. Again, I'm not a doctor. I don't know, Ben, if you do have any anything that you would like to add here.
Nothing specific to that. I think that
I
was
tried.
very helpful. Yes, that was really good.
It's a good question. I think out of considerations, especially with GDPR, in that part of the world being sensitive. Yeah, and I'm not sure the answer to that myself as well. But it is a pretty good question, I think.
I would just say that I'm sorry, Justin. I would just say that
what
we're seeing here is a level of sophistication around GDPR and other global standards that they're not, they are credited in a significant way. And I think that that's important. So, we do see that in our day-to-day work.
Excellent. And so a follow-up question, and by the way, to the person that asked this question, I am fully aware and able to admit that I am an American. And so please forgive me if I pronounce your name incorrectly, but I read it as Abbas Asgarali. So if I got that wrong, please forgive me. But the question is, how long was the process of the assessment and what was the cost? I think that might be a Letitia and Bob question.
Sure. In terms of the process, we probably, look at different timings. So we had to prepare, obviously, internally. I would say our internal review took about maybe 6 months, but it's just because we were not completely dedicated to that at the time, and we're still dealing with the pandemic. But when it came to the audit itself, it was 2 days on site. So it wasn't really disruptive to our business operation. We were able to really continue, so that was good. Probably how long for you?
Yeah, again, even with a complex travel program, there's quite a bit of pre-planning, but actually our aim is not to cause any disruption, or at least the minimum disruption as possible. So the team were able to complete the audit in 2 days. That was submitted to a UK government-approved regulator who regulates the audit process that we use and certificates the process. So actually, PwC were the first organisation to gain such a certification. And I need to make clear that's not an ISO certification. That is just an independent certification of audit against the ISO standard. And the cost is on a sliding scale depending on the size of the organisation, complexity of the travel program, but it is a very modest cost, I can assure you, in comparison to what you're spending on your travel risk management program.
And Mukesh, from your angle, where are you in the process of the assessment? Have you completed? Or are you still going through it? And if so, what are your time frame expectations?
Yeah, good question, Justin. We have some internal audits carried out by our internal auditors. Then we have annual audits conducted by third party, which is coming in November month. And then once we're done with our travel risk management under that audit, then we will go for the independent audit with the external agency. So we have annual audits which is done by the certified auditors within the organization. And travel security risk management is included in that this year.
Great, thank you. And so Papa Abdullah Mbai, again, American, please forgive me if I did that wrong, asks a very good question. Does the standard cover airports, ports, bus, and train station stages of the travel stages when we know the risks and challenges specific to those places?
Yeah, perhaps I can take that one, Justin, and it absolutely does, insofar as you are required to give consideration or to assess the destination and the route that your traveler's taking. And that would, of course, include the transportation hubs that they're passing through. Now, obviously, airports are regulated to a greater or lesser extent around the world, depending on where you are. In many jurisdictions, they're very heavily regulated for security and safety. And these are things that you need to assess. You know, airlines. There are airlines out there that operate that, you know, do have issues with pilot accreditation and have, you know, not such strong safety records. So you do need to make an assessment about that and whether that, you know, is acceptable. Now, if you're operating in very remote parts of the world or in developing countries, you may not be able to access the standards that you can in many other parts of the world. So you have to, so this goes back to, you know, the type of travel program that you have. If you're in oil exploration and you're sending people to very remote parts of the world, then your risk appetite, you know, will be higher, but at the same time, you'll be required to look at every opportunity to mitigate those risks. And there have been, you know, cases, sadly, you know, where people have lost their lives because of a poor choice of transportation mode. And in fact, a UK company was held liable for such a case in South America, where an employee took a helicopter ride which wasn't approved by the company, and the company didn't have proper approval processes, and so the courts found against them. So these are really important considerations.
Excellent, excellent. So Mary Ellen Yeager has asked, do you recommend changing the terminology from preferred hotels to company negotiated? Based on ISO, would preferred indicate that the hotel has been fully vetted and there's no liability to the company? Who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll have a crack at that one, Justin, because it's an area I'm quite familiar with. What I think what the standard is really saying is that preferred program should not refer necessarily to just price and facilities. It ought to include the fact that that hotel has been assessed by the organization, whether that's through requiring accreditation or whether it's through its own assessment processes, that some element of health, safety and security has been considered before you designate it as preferred. But I think a company negotiated, you know, might have the same problem. That could relate to, you've got a very good deal on price, but no one's given any consideration to safety and security. So I think as long as it's got that element of considering safety, security and health standards, then I think you'll be okay.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Bob. Now here's a question that I find kind of interesting. I might it's an anonymous, but I'm wondering if whoever it is would be willing to maybe clarify. So the question is there a document that outlines all the aspects of ISO 31030 that companies should have to make sure all of the boxes are checked when looking for a travel risk management partner? So I'm wondering if this person is asking for something for an RFP questionnaire or something that shows that they as a company have tried to undergo an assessment. So maybe a little clarification there, but the question is, as you would interpret it, and Bob, I think we could happily provide the route to the actual ISO 31030 doc for in our follow-up, from this webinar today. But I don't know if you have any thoughts that you would like to speak to. I don't know if you see that, because I'm kind of wondering the specifics of the question there, but I think that would be another one for you to field, Bob.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And at the moment, I'm not aware of any such document. You have the standard itself, which does talk about selecting your providers of travel services and your travel management company partner that you may be working with. And it really does stresses the importance of communicating to your travel partners and your travel suppliers your policy standards and your requirements in terms of safety, security, and health requirements. So it is seen as a partnership, working across the industry. And I think we're still in that evolution where companies are developing their requirements now in this new ISO 31030 world, and that is starting to change the behaviors of their suppliers and their travel partners.
Yeah, and I think, and so there was a follow-up clarification. Says, regards to my question, if I were to look for alternatives to my current provider, but want to make sure ISO is covered, what are the bullet points that must be addressed? And I think, my answer to that would be to download ISO 31030 and read through it. It's not a super extensive document, and it's fairly inexpensive. It's actually, in my opinion, very inexpensive for what it covers. So, and like I said, we could provide the link or the place to be able to download that document and our follow-up as well. Papa did follow up, Bob. He gave you a compliment. You really touched on where I was driving at when mentioning challenges. They're very regulated places at an airport and airline level. Very much appreciated there. And then we've got another comment. GBTA is doing a survey for providers of TRM services to share their capabilities. So just for our audience to be able to take a look at some assessments and some suggestions for assessments for your TRM partners out there. Want to thank everyone for attending today. I want to thank the panelists for joining. Just if you'll bear with us for a couple quick minutes, we'll go ahead and close out here. I'm going to turn it over to Bob, if you would. Give us a little bit of an indication of who GSA is, please.
Well, very briefly, GSA came into being really recognizing the difficulty in assessing accommodation safety and security. So we developed what we believe was the world's first fully independent and regulated hotel accreditation system, which was overseen by a UK government-approved regulator, a qualifications and standards body, and they police us, and they are the final arbiter of whether a hotel or a service department meets appropriate safety and security standards. And of course, 31030 very much the litmus test there. So that's us.
Excellent, thank you. And just a brief note on Traxo, for the ISO 31030 guidelines, one of the probably more seemingly obvious pieces that are needed is full and complete data, and having that full and complete data before a trip happens as much as possible. So for those of you not too familiar with what we do at Traxo, we are the world's only provider of real-time corporate travel data capture, providing our clients with the ability to capture within seconds employee bookings, cancellations, and changes, regardless of the source, essentially solving the challenge of what is known in the industry as leakage, and bringing in full visibility to all corporate travel data to ensure safety, compliance, and proper spend management without the need to install software or involve the company's employees. If you would like to learn more about Traxo, how we could accomplish this for your organization, please visit us online at www.traxo.com. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. We look forward to seeing you again on the next installment of the Traxo Office Hours series. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.